Okay, well, it's a couple of minutes past 1. Let's get started. I think we've got most of our people on. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Florence at the U.S. Forest Service in Durham, New Hampshire. And I guess good morning to the people in Mountain Time, to Lindy and anyone else that might be listening from there. Welcome to the Connecticut River Partnership webinar series. Today we're going to be hearing about and discussing strike teams. But first, I just have a couple of technical points I'd like to mention. Today's webinar will be recorded, so please keep your phones on mute when you're asking a question. The link for the recording will be made available after our webinar, and you may share that with colleagues that weren't able to join on the call. Another point is you will be able to ask questions throughout the call. Again, please remember to take your phone off mute and introduce yourself when you ask a question. We're also going to be watching for written questions, and if you look at your screens on the upper left-hand menu bar, you'll see a Q&A tab, and you can click on that Q&A tab and type in your question if you choose to type that in, and we'll be monitoring that as well. I think that's it. So unless anyone has any questions, I'm going to turn you over to Cynthia Bettner, the coordinator for the Connecticut River Partnership, and she's going to give you an introduction and introduce our speakers.
Hello, everyone. I'm Cynthia Bettner, and I work for the Silvio Conti National Fish and Wildlife Refuge, whose boundary is the Connecticut River watershed, in fact. And I'd like to thank the Forest Service, Florence and Tom Luther, for providing the technical support on this webinar and the technology that goes along with it. If it wasn't for that, we probably wouldn't be able to carry this out. We've opened this event up to folks well beyond the watershed, thinking that this discussion would benefit the region as a whole, and to give some consideration to this idea of using strike teams for controlling invasive species. We're especially interested in the control of these newly emerging invaders, or early detection species, as a lot of us call them. So just to give you a sequence of events for this session, I'll just go briefly through what the order of events will be. First, I'll give a very brief introduction to what we're doing in the Connecticut River watershed. And then Lindy Gardner, our main speaker, will tell us about the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service strike team that she manages in Montana, which is one of several teams in the U.S. She'll also describe some of the important things we should know as we consider this model of strike teams and thinking about whether it would be a good fit to do something like that in the Northeast or New England or the watershed or a state or even just a single property. We'll hear about the New Jersey strike team from Susan Brookman and about a refuge scale team at the Great Swamp National Wildlife Refuge from Steve Henry. Then Charlie Schweik from the University of Massachusetts, who's been thinking about how a regional watershed-based team could work out, will fill us in on his ideas, and he's looking for feedback on what we think about that and what other things he should be considering if he goes ahead with trying to submit a proposal to a granting agency. And in there, Lindy's is the only presentation that will be the only formal presentation. So after hers, we'll switch over to a more informal discussion when Steve and Susan and Charlie will do brief introductions on their programs, and we'll introduce ourselves as well before all that begins, just so we have a better sense of who's on the line and where they're from. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Lindy. We're really lucky to have her joining us today. She's the invasive species coordinator in the Mountain Prairie region, or Region 6 of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. There she provides operational support on both national and regional levels, on habitat management and the use of herbicides for invasive species. And she oversees the Montana Strike Team, but will be filling us in a little bit about other teams in the U.S. as well. So, Lindy, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Cynthia. Now, Florence, I don't see that you have switched me over to presenter yet. Have you done that?
Hold on just a second. Sorry.
Okay. Well, while she does that, everyone can see, hopefully, does anyone not see the Region 6 map up on the screen that shows the states of Montana down to Kansas and Colorado? Okay. So like Cynthia said, I'm the Regional Invasive Species Coordinator for this region for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And so I'm the National Wildlife Refuge System support person. So anything they have to do with invasive species management, pesticide compliance, or any of those technical operation issues, as well as policy and those types of things at a regional and national level, then I'm the representative for this region. And so these 8 states, of these 8 states, all the refuges within those 8 states are the ones that I support. So I'm a regional office employee that should be down in Lakewood or Denver, down around in here is where I should be office, but because I oversee the Montana Strike Team, I get the added benefit, and probably one of the reasons why I took this job was because I got to be based in Montana because I'm overseeing the strike team here in Montana. And so, let's see if I have control yet. Nope. And just to get you started then, the strike team mainly only works in the state of Montana, so you can kind of compare that, but they do go corner to corner of the state relative to the type of area that you're working in. And so I'm hoping that some of the lessons that we've learned and some of the things that I'm going to present for you guys to think about in deciding whether or not you want more of a regional type team, you can kind of see the scale of Montana that we're working on versus the area that you're potentially going to be working on. And I do want to mention that you guys have a fabulous program. I'm extremely impressed, and you guys are much further ahead of the game than a lot of the folks that I've talked to in the West about similar concepts in the terms of the groups of people you already have working together and the volunteer effort. And you have Steve Henry in your midst that basically helped get this strike team going here in Montana before he came out east. And so you've got a tremendous amount of resources to work from. I'd also like to mention while we wait, this presentation has a lot of information in it. I'm not going to just talk about my strike team in terms of what we've done. In fact, not that much from an accomplishment standpoint. I'm coming at this more after Cynthia and I talked about how we make it work, where are the lessons learned, where are the problems, where are the advantages, and I'd like to use the presentation just as a conduit for you guys. If we need to stop and talk about something and how that differs relative to the New Jersey strike team or relative to a local strike team, let's do it then and there. So don't feel apprehensive about stopping me or wanting to try to discuss things at that point, because I've just tried to bring up these issues that we can then kind of compare and contrast as we go and make that the most beneficial for you guys. I have no problem with doing that. So, and once we get this switched over, we'll get started.
Lindy, this is Florence. You should have full control of the screen. Just a reminder to click on your thumbnail, the first thumbnail, and that should give you control of the arrow.
There. Perfect. Yeah. Okay. So I've already talked about it. I do oversee the Montana Invasive Species Strike Team, and as with everybody, the National Wildlife Refuge System has a tremendous issue with invasive species. Our numbers from our reporting efforts say about 2.5 million acres of refuge lands are infested, but this is a very conservative number, and probably the same thing you guys seen, that there's many of our areas, especially in the West also, that have not been surveyed yet. So as we survey more land, even though we're doing treatment, this number continues to go up, and a huge problem. And, of course, as always, whether you're a government agency or a nonprofit or a landowner, you never have enough money or enough time to treat your invasive species. And then off with climate change, whether you believe it or not, things are changing to some degree, and some of these species respond well to that change, and they do better and increase quicker. And some of them, I think it will be beneficial to us. We'll start to see some declines. Other issues that we'll have to watch, of course, are things like whether the biocontrol is going to work better or worse, the same kind of thing. A lot of research is out there about how pesticides and certain herbicides may lose some of their beneficial action depending on how these respond to things as increased carbon dioxide in the air and such. So constantly moving target and constant battle for all of us, and we all are thinking, how are we going to deal with this and how are we going to make any ground? And I think that's where we have to rely on invasion ecology, and we all know, and that's why you guys are interested, that yes, prevention is best, but early detection is the next best thing. And as you go from on the x-axis time, as you increase in time, you do see your species start to rise as far as area invaded, and that just rises with the cost that it will take for you to treat them. And so you've got your widely established populations that are going to take a huge amount of effort and really start to try to decide, are we going to just try to contain these or develop sacrifice areas? Where can we have the most beneficial impact? And it does seem to be right here with the early detection and rapid response, so that we can prevent that additional management burden becoming developed for each of our properties. Oh, now it's not wanting to. Okay. So the Fish and Wildlife Service, back when we President passed the Executive Order 1311-2 in 99, it formalized this concept of an invasive species strike team, and definitely highlighting prevention and early detection and being able to respond rapidly. And it was established by the National Invasive Species Council that came out of the executive order, and they really wanted to model it after the idea of hotshot fire crews, similar, where you try to detect, contain, and then completely put the fire out. And so this idea of, could we not do this with invasive species? And the Park Service jumped on it and really put a lot of effort into it and have quite an extensive program. They have 16 to 18 exotic plant management teams now. The Fish and Wildlife Service began a few years later, and it just never materialized to the degree that the Park Service had, but we do have a small program. To take a step back for a second, just to make sure everybody understands what we're talking about with early detection and rapid response. So if you've got these large, well-established populations, which many people are used to working on and thinking about it from a seed source standpoint, versus these small, new satellite infestations popping up, and we actually go after these much quicker and put all our effort into these and eradicate them. I can't get my thing to go. There we go. While still trying to just work on containment of the larger infestations. So it's the new satellite infestations, whether it's a new invader or even if it's just a new patch of an existing species that's already occurring. It still shows that the cost effectiveness is much greater to work on smaller patches. So for the Fish and Wildlife Service, we have about 5 teams, and the first 3 that were developed were the Montana one and the one down actually in Arizona, but Arizona and Florida, the first 3, and these were purely congressional driven. Many of our other regions just kind of get a straight team as far as getting funds obligated to us, and this was purely congressional driven, and so there's not any type of additional internal money that we put aside. It was something that came in as new money. And then a few years later, the North Dakota team and the Hawaii team funding sources were developed. And then I'll talk about how each of these actually operate in a little bit of a different way. Do have a vision, and it is primarily to try to work through early detection and rapid response. We do work on prevention. There is an extended amount of monitoring with the projects that we work on. We have not done as much restoration. We are trying to develop some opportunities and ways that we can get more involved in that, and we do a fair amount of education and outreach, like many of you guys do. So just to run through the different Fish and Wildlife Service teams, and this is where folks may have some comments. In the Southwest, as I mentioned, the funding sources came in. Initially, they were all for Arizona, and then they started splitting it up among the states as the refugees said, well, wait a minute, why can't we have some of that funding? And so they have split that funding source up a little bit. And as you can see, the Arizona, they do a fair amount of core. The way they spend money is rather than contracting a contractor, they develop a co-op agreement and use a youth corps some of their projects, or they've actually hired out the Park Service interagency, the exotic plant management team through an interagency agreement. So there are some different ways to basically then just spend that money. New Mexico did end up hiring a crew very similar to the crew that I oversee, and we're the only two crews from a Fish and Wildlife Service standpoint from the official invasive species strike teams with these initial teams, where we actually hire seasonal to come on and do these projects throughout the summer. It's New Mexico and myself. And so they modeled this one a fair amount after the one that we have here in Montana. And Texas and Oklahoma just use the funding where they kind of disperse it to the refuge and ask them to put towards early detection and rapid response projects. And we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later as well. New Mexico is where they have the crews. Just for an example, they do a variety of different projects. They are big into the tamarisk and Russian olive projects. They have a lot of sensitive species that they work with. Arizona works on especially things like velvet mesquite, where they're trying to work on improving habitat for the threatened masked bobwhite quail, or the endangered, and then, of course, you've got things like the Hawaii and Pacific Islands where you've got many sensitive species, numerous beyond belief for invasive species. They don't have, of course, near enough money, so they have to do a lot of prioritizing and trying to figure out which projects to work on. And he uses a mixture of a little bit of contract work and some interns, and then I believe he hires one or two. He is now hiring one or two people a year. Florida, one of the first ones, very active, has had a fair amount of money, does a very good job, all with experienced contractors, runs a very tight ship for using contractors. A great program down there, again, also trying to prioritize and how to decide on which projects, and we'll talk a little bit about that. North Dakota and my region also got some invasive species strike team money. And they initially were trying to do some crew work, and the refuges decided that they wanted to try to just disperse the money among the refuges and have that money used for invasive species management. We do lose a little bit of control on whether or not they're going to truly prioritize it on early detection and rapid response type projects. And this is one where it did create some interest, for some other people. The senators really wanted folks to still keep working on large infestations. They were getting some political pressure, and so there's kind of been a give and take on this team where they do some EDRR-type mapping, but they also participate in a number of projects that would not be considered EDRR. Still invasive species management, still a lot of great work. Doesn't have that strict priority for early detection, rapid response, and something you have to think about with your partners when some of these things come up as far as how much of a hard line are we going to stand on this? Are we going to have some criteria that the infestation has to meet before they can use our money or use our team on this project, or are we going to be lenient? Are we going to, because as soon as you open that door, then others are asking too, whether it's because of political pressure or if it's because of traditional effort. They're looking for additional help to see if they can see a benefit in any kind of treatment that they're working on. And then there's Montana-Wyoming one, like I mentioned, as far as I do. We'll get to the fact that I the crew, and I'll show you how we've done that. I also use Youth Corps for some projects because our Youth Corps are so cost-effective, as long as you have somebody helping oversee the project. But they've really worked out well for us. Also using cooperative agreements with some counties where we work on a couple of projects together, and I can get them money because as everyone, we have more projects requested usually than what we can get to, and so this is another good way of, I just don't have enough bodies. I might have a little bit of funding left over for co-op agreements with the counties, and or then depending on the type of project, we do some aerial and some larger type projects that I have to contract. I can't use the crew for it. And a variety of species that we'll get into more here. Before I switch into kind of specifics on this program, is there any other comments folks want to make about using youth corps or contracts or co-op agreements with counties? Has anyone else used that type of thing? Okay.
Well, one thing, Lindy.
What's that?
One thing I thought I could mention here is that the Conti Refuge, because we're watershed-based, the whole Connecticut River watershed, we've got a EDRR program going for water chestnut, an aquatic invasive plant, and we've been making a lot of progress keeping that species in check by using Youth Conservation Corps members.
Yeah.
We have our own corps, and then the Trustees of Reservations, a nonprofit conservation organization in our area, also has a crew. So they come out and help us for a day or two as well. So that's been our experience with using Youth Corps in the watershed itself.
Great, perfect. Yeah, we've found that especially for a very targeted project where I need a lot of bodies and I just don't have enough, even if I combined my crews, and again, depending on terrain and access and those sorts of things, they work really well. And again, from the cost standpoint, they've just worked out really well for us for a variety of different projects in that sense. And then using the crew for something that needs a little more expertise or a little more care in terms of wanting to make sure that we have the expertise of somebody crossing that land, that we feel good and confident and that they can find the plants and that sort of thing. Where the Youth Corps are good for something that's very obvious in your face. They just go out there and pull it or what have you. You don't need that conscientious trying to cover an area and find something that's more rare or not as out there as much. So I'm going to go into the specifics, and this is where, again, if folks have questions, please interrupt me. I tend to get to talking fast or quickly, so please feel free to stop me. So I threw this in only from the standpoint of, so for the state of Montana, like I mentioned earlier, when you were looking at the extent of Montana in terms of what the Fish and Wildlife Service is trying to cover, we've got about 1.3 million acres of refuge system lands, and we don't begin to cover all of that. But from a Montana standpoint, for the Montana Strike Team, we initially began the program with 3 crews. We had one stationed out at CMR, one here in Great Falls, and then one on the western side of the state. So they were kind of scattered, remotely supervised, and then each crew was made up of 3 to 4 crew members. Due to logistics and being able to keep seasonals on, this CMR team became pretty much logistically possible to keep running. There were safety issues. There was turn in the area is so vast and remote, and you have to learn this road system. It just wasn't working out. Housing was difficult to find. We've always had trouble getting people hired. So that one, it was decided that we would run that mainly through contracts and co-op agreements. We have a couple of contractors in the area that are very good. They know that area. Even though it is remote, they know how to get around. They know how to deal with weather. And so it was modified and changed to those types of projects. So being able to, again, have that flexibility and modify your model to the degree that you need to is something to keep in mind. And then the other 2 crews we do run like normal. As you can see, here's the Stevens Hill, we host one team, the team that's stationed out of the same office that I am, and then this is where the other team was. We do travel from corner to corner. This team will pretty much cover the central part of the state, up into the Bedoin district, over into CMR, and then Bedoin, and then all the way over here to the Medicine Lake area, which is about a 7-hour drive. And we often will drive this crew over there as well. They both will visit Red Rocks, which is about a 5 to 6 hour drive. So this whole travel situation or impact of logistics will come in play into discussion as well, as far as, and then so looking at that from a regional standpoint, you know, how far and where would you want to place crews to be able to reduce that travel time, because it really affects your work schedule, and how much you can get done in a project and in a week, and whether or not you want folks traveling home so that they're home for the weekend, or if you extend their work cycle so that they can finish the project, but then that means they have to have more time off when they come back. That affects your window of phenology of when you need to be there to treat the plants. It all starts to play into the story. And so especially from a regional crew, those are some of the type of things you want to think about. The way this one's done is, so where a crew is stationed, so for instance, at Benton Lake National Wildlife Refuge, and then I have one at Lee Metcalf National Wildlife Refuge, they're considered my administrative, even though I oversee both of them. But that office then provides, you know, supplies. We're providing technical assistance and that sort of things to the refuges that we're supporting. My office actually does all the budget and scheduling and supervising the crew to procure and maintain your equipment, and then, of course, all of the data management. And so, again, depending on how much data you want to come with this, just the data management aspect of it can snowball very quickly as far as how much information you want to get out of those data, you want to get back to the people that you help support, what type of information do they want versus what type of information do you need to try to run your program and to monitor your accomplishments and to see if you're where you want to be. All of that plays into it. So you have administrative units. The budget, there's a fair amount of money in this program, as you can see, but a portion of that goes to my salary and part of the biologist salary that's part of the regional program. So even though it's called straight team budget, my region has used that funding to help support me just as budget cuts have gone down the road. But still, the majority of the cost is your salary for your crew and your crew leaders and whoever is your manager and those sorts of things. Project costs would be things like that initial startup cost of equipment, your chemical, your backpack sprayers, your ATV sprayers, your pumps, all those sorts of things. And then our other biggest one is definitely our travel. Now, being government employees, of course, when they're on travel, they get paid, you know, a per diem. We pay for their lodging. Usually, if you use a contractor, they're going to travel. Something for you guys to think about is if you're trying to support strike team yourself, things like the New Jersey strike team, you know, how are you going to handle that? How the travel costs are going to be covered and to what degree? Because that can quickly, depending on where you have your team stationed, start to eat up your cost and time, like I mentioned earlier. I must have moved. I'm missing a slide, but we'll come across it here in a minute. So from invasive species for Montana, there's numerous ones. We deal with numerous ones that are all early detection, rapid response in various forms. You know, we'll have areas that may be significantly covered in spotted knapweed, but in a particular waterfowl production or particular refuge, it's not really on there. For us, it is an EDRR species, but from a landscape level, it might not be an EDRR species. And again, how do you want to make those kind of decisions? Where are those kind of lines or thresholds going to be drawn for where and how you do work? What may be an EDR to one landowner, if the landowner next door has a ton of it, you know, are those going to be considered EDR type projects? Some of those kind of things to think about. So with all the projects that are out there that could be done, how do you decide which projects you're going to do? And Steve Henry was, I think, the one that came up with this, and I still use it to this day. I don't use it to the same degree of formality as maybe you did, Steve, but we still use it. We still rank out projects based on all of these criteria, and really getting people to understand these criteria. I can't stress that enough, and I'll keep coming back to the communication of, well, why are you doing this project versus this one, and why won't you do my project if you're doing his project? And getting people to understand those criteria, having those one-on-one conversations, having that very clearly stated, telling them when you ask them for proposals, telling them again when you say, well, here's which ones we've decided, and then tell them again, when you show up, because it's constantly questioned. It's constantly kind of pushed back of, well, what about, could you do this while you're here too? You really have to toe a hard line sometimes with folks to get them to understand that we're here to do yellow-toed flax, and while we're out here doing yellow-toed flax, all we're doing is yellow-toed flax. We're not doing these other species that are out there too. It is only this one, unless you agree to that. But it's those types of misunderstandings or miscommunications that can really create havoc with your program, and getting people to buy into it, as well as getting people to believe in it and see the good work that you're doing. Because if they don't understand that, then to them, well, you only treated 20 acres. And they don't understand that, well, you covered 2,000 acres, you surveyed 2,000 acres, and you treated 20 acres of an early detection response. And that's all, again, based on these criteria and working with folks to get them to understand that. And we'll probably come back to that a little bit more, too. But any questions on any comments relative to that?
Wendy, this is Florence. I would just like to remind people to keep their phones on mute. And if you don't have a mute button, you can use #6. But I heard a little background noise. It was kind of interfering with you a little bit there. So phones on mute.
Is it #6 or *6?
I believe maybe it is *6. I started to say *6. Thanks, Cynthia. I think it is *6.
Sure. And Lindy, one thing that I think might be valuable is if you can clarify what you mean by occurs on service interests.
Okay, so that's just relative to us. That's where the priority for us is if it's on Fish and Wildlife Service lands, fee title lands, or easement properties. So technically, we're not supposed to spend our appropriated dollars off of service interests or off, on like private land and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we work ways around that by trying to do some in-kind stuff with landowners or through some of our community spray efforts and some of those kind of things. But, like, we wouldn't get a request from, technically, even like, if a landowner called and said, well, I had a county call me the other day and say, it's within the landscape of some refuge system lands, but it's not on refuge system lands that they want to do an aerial spray. And he was asking, so can the STRIC team come up and map it for us? Well, because it's within the landscape, I might try to finagle something. It's early in the season where we might be able to zip up there and do it as part of a good partner or a good neighbor, but we don't hire out like kind of the exotic plant management teams do at this point. We don't, just because we've got more than enough work that what we can do. And right now we have funding to do what we need to do. I think some of the EPMT teams hire out per se because they're trying to stay afloat and get additional funding to stay basically operating longer throughout the year. So for us, it's a proposal coming from a refuge. I put out a request for proposals. They tell me what their project is, and then I'm checking to make sure that it is on a waterfowl production area or on a refuge or an easement refuge. But that's what the service interest means.
Okay, thank you.
The land interest of ownership.
Right. And here in the Connecticut River watershed, things could be a little different because our refuge boundary is the full watershed, so we do have some purview and jurisdiction outside of our own service-owned land.
Yeah, that exterior boundary. It's within your exterior boundary of that project area, isn't it? it's within that. Even though you don't own all the land, you have a boundary that says this is where we're working, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, yeah. No, that is a little different, and we actually have a conservation area on the Rocky Mountain front that's very similar to that, and that's where I do a lot of in-kind service type work that's technically not on service interest lands, but I don't know if technically I should be doing that. But, you know, again, from being a partner, and I can argue it because it is within the conservation area boundary, same kind of thing. So if you were coming at it from a Fish and Wildlife Service standpoint, you would have to get some clarification on that authority. And and it's been frustrating because this is another one of those authorities that the Forest Service has too, and the Park Service also does. And I'm trying to work on another project where I'm trying to get people to work outside their boundaries. And it's just not, even though we talk a lot about it, people start to get uncomfortable because money is so limited, you know. And so whether or not they want to provide funding to a project that's outside their boundary is, people start questioning whether or not they have the authority to do that. And so it is a constant battle from that.
Yeah. It's an important issue, and we do have people on the line, too, from other refuges in the Northeast, you know, as we consider whether this is something we might want to do as a region for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as opposed to just the Conti Refuge watershed area. So anyway, I just thought I'd bring that up, but thank you for clarifying that.
Any other comments or questions about, you know, trying to develop criteria for your projects or these thresholds for where and how, which ones you work on? Okay. So relative to that, this is something what I meant by communication. We constantly have to remind folks that from a strike team standpoint, we are working on this section of the curve, and it is those EDRR type projects compared to, and these are where, of course, where you can see them out there, even though they are starting to get to be a little more difficult to find if they're, depending on how small they are, compared to, you know, a lot of refuges are still working on these long-term, you know, infestations that they've had forever, and they're still trying to work on them and try to get someplace, and trying to get them to understand that strike team or EDR funding is meant to prevent additional management burden. It's not additional dollars to work on existing projects or not additional dollars to work on existing maintenance of certain areas. It's additional money to work to prevent additional management burden from coming on the scene. And it's hard for people to unlearn or hard for people to let go of that because they have a lot of traditional effort into some of these sites, and they see this as new money, or actually they've lost money where they can't continue to put money in those traditional sites, and trying to work with them again to understand the concept and the philosophy of, okay, maybe if you have been doing this for 10 years and it's still not gone, you need to think about doing something else. And maybe we can help you with some containment, or you can put some dollars just to containment so it wouldn't cost you much, and let's use the strike team dollars on your new infestations. But it's a constant struggle with some of our folks to get them to understand that money's strictly for EDRR. The other one, too, is, of course, so then when we put out the proposals, we get them back, we rank them, we let everyone know which ones we're going to work on, and now we're pretty much booked before we ever get started because we are continuing to, like, finish projects that we started a year or two ago. We are seeing eradication. But, of course, we are seeing species move across the landscape, so even though some locations are blinking out, other ones are blinking up, and it's a constant struggle. But the other thing, too, is just in terms of, from a strike team standpoint, is balancing that full spectrum of projects, because what happens is sometimes then everybody wants you to come work on salt cedar same time. They all want you to come in August before hunting season starts, or they all want you to come on maybe Dalmatian toadflax in July or what have you. And so you really have to get good at trying to figure out, you know, and which method do you want to use for that particular site? When is the appropriate phenological time for that plant, especially if you're applying a pesticide? Even though, let's say, a pesticide can be used on a particular plant for more than, 1 or 2 months, if the most effective time is in the fall after a freeze or something, then that's when we try to schedule it. And we try to maximize that effort so we get the best bang for our buck from a strike team standpoint. Yeah, maybe we could have done it in July, but that's not the best time to do it. Then we want to come in September or what have you. And that's another one that's hard, depending on if you want to, again, tote that kind of line of expertise, if you will, or if you want to have more flexibility, again, making sure that that's kind of written down, almost like metadata, on what methods you use, why you use it, and this is the service that we can offer. If we're going to do it, this is when we want to do it. And then working with that landowner, whoever it may be, and making sure that it fits their schedule, if they're grazing or haying, and making sure all of those components fit together. And then just being able to juggle all those projects and try to get them all scheduled in from May to October, and, of course, maximize the number of projects possible. We end up doing about 50 to 60 different projects from about the end of May. Well, some of our early work we do during training, but basically from May through mid-October is when our season is. And 50 to 60 projects, around 10 refuges, and around 25 to 30 waterfowl production areas are the type of area that we're covering. And we're trying not to go to places more than once unless they just happen to have 2 or 3 species. And then we will visit an area a couple of times with different chemical on board, because that's the most effective time. We may go in for spurge, we may go in for toadflax, and we may go in for hound's tongue if that's what's needed. We're not going to pick some generic, less effective herbicide and only go in once unless there's some type of sensitive area that we're trying to reduce disturbance and those kind of things. But all of those factors have to be kind of taken into account when you're scheduling projects. And I have to say, it's a fairly administrative burden in the spring as far as trying to figure out what would work best, working with all those folks, and getting everybody scheduled, everybody happy, and then myself to feel good professionally that this is the best time that we can go in there. We've not sacrificed any quality, and we're set up for the season. So the administrative oversight from just taking the proposals, reviewing them, and then scheduling can be fairly significant depending on how you do it, if you're running a full-blown crew like that.
Lindy, this is Charlie Schweik from University of Massachusetts Amherst. Can I ask a question?
You bet.
You may talk about this in the future slide, but I've got a question about kind of the system for this reporting an outbreak, or you've talked about proposals. Maybe I missed it, but who are these people that are sending these proposals to you? I'd like to hear a little bit more about that system, either right now or in the future slides. Thanks.
Yeah, so since this is just a Fish and Wildlife Service strike team, it's just all my refuges in Montana. So any refuge or waterfowl production area in Montana and northern Wyoming, technically, can submit proposals to me. So if I do a call, I just put an email out to my project leaders and say, if you want strike team support, send me a proposal. But like I said, basically, we've got that relationship so set now because we've been doing this for a while. I'll contact them and say, okay, we want to finish up these projects. Do you have any new or additional projects, or do you want to change your priorities? And then we'll try to get those scheduled. So this, for me, for this team, it's just Fish and Wildlife Service, National Wildlife Refuges, or waterfowl production areas.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Cynthia, can I interrupt? This is Mike Bald calling in from Vermont. Can I ask a question here, if it's okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, thanks. I'm sorry to interrupt the presentation. I'm just having an impossible time getting through livemeeting.com. Do I have to be on a secure network to make this happen?
Oh, Florence, do you want to talk to him about that?
No, I don't think so. Tom? I guess Tom's not on right now. He had another call. Are you on a Mac or a PC?
Mike, one thing you might want to try, this is Cynthia, is copy the link and try it with Internet Explorer if you haven't done that already. I had some trouble earlier today.
Okay.
But on a PC, if you're on a Mac, that won't work.
Okay, I've not tried Internet Explorer. I can do that. I think I've tried Firefox. What about? Does anybody recommend trying it with Google?
No, you should use Internet Explorer if you have that available.
Okay. And apologies again for barging in.
Hey,
No,
Mike, also
okay.
make sure your pop-up blockers are not on. That might be an issue.
Right, got that.
And the only other thing I noticed in mine, when I went in through Google Chrome, it looked like it didn't do anything when I hit launch meeting, but down on the bottom left, it said, not launch, live meeting. At the bottom, it had a little button that said launch.rte, and I hit that, and then it brought up the screen. So I don't know if you can Google Chrome, if it will do
All right,
that.
that's a thought. Okay. I'll keep working it here. I'm listening, but I would certainly love to see something. But okay, thanks again.
You bet. Okay, so they send proposals. I rank them. I try to schedule them out based on phenology and appropriate application timing, or whatever method that we're using, the appropriate timing. And then the refuge, the National Wildlife Refuge that is going to get the work, then does have a fair amount of work to do before we get there. You know, if there's any type of environmental clearance that needs to be done, they're in charge of that. Internally for the Fish and Wildlife Service, we have our own pesticide use type compliance protocol that they're in charge of. If there's any type of sensitive species or any type of Section 7 clearance they need to get or deal with, again, that's they're in charge of all of those kind of things. So that the strike team can literally just come in, do the project, and leave, basically. And how you guys deal with any of those kind of things or permitting, that's going to vary, of course, across states, especially if there's any type of water application, you know, with National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permits, all of those kind of things. Again, if it's not being ran from an internal agency, if it's more of an across-the-region kind of group, that would require some thought, too, to figure out how all of that permitting, because, you know, like a contractor has to get their own permits and those sorts of things, but depending on the type of permit, sometimes a contractor and a landowner has to get one. So a lot of those types of administrative issues have to be ironed out as well, especially for applying pesticides. Now, if it's handwork, not necessarily the case, but so they've gotten the compliance work done, and then we hire the crews. And like I said, we hire anywhere from 4 to 7 crew members, and then I have 2 crew leaders, and we do a lot of training, train, and more training. This was something we implemented extensively, and it has paid off in dividends. Is it time-consuming and keeps us from project work? Yes. But we spend, when the crews come on, we are doing kind of administrative training and compliance type things that they have to get done the first week, as well as introducing them to things like GPS units and getting them out in the field so that they've at least seen it before they come to the official training. And then we have a week-long extensive GIS, use of GPS type system or training for a week that includes also things like all our mapping guidelines and our protocols that we've developed. I can talk a little bit more about that in a minute. ATV and vehicle safety type issues, and then most importantly, if they're spraying pesticides, all the licensing, how to handle mix, how to apply it appropriately, how to carry it in a truck, what do you do if there's a spill. I mean, there's just a significant component that oftentimes people forget about from the standpoint of whether you're mapping weeds or spraying weeds. It's not as simple as sticking a GPS unit in their hand or strapping a backpack on them, because to be safe and to keep those people safe, the training pays off tremendously, especially when they're having to travel and go away from you, or if you're having to do any type of remote supervision. This is where it gets expensive in the responsibility compared to something like just hiring a contractor. If you have funding available, oftentimes then it's more worthwhile just to hire a contractor, because then they're all responsible for it, because this just steps it up entirely in terms of the responsibility. But if the time is put into it, you can get a very good crew, a very good product, and they have a great time, and they learn a tremendous amount and get to see a huge amount of country for the project. So just a little bit about GPS and GIS and collecting data. It looks like you guys are definitely already on a lot of these types of concepts, but just as an example, when you have like a strike team or a crew that's going to come out somewhere and let's say they survey this area and they find one plant, if you're not keeping things like track logs over here to where you can find that exterior boundary or that perimeter of where they looked, that provides you much more information to know that, okay, I've looked in this entire area and I only found one infestation. If you don't keep track logs or if you don't GPS that exterior perimeter, knowing that you have one plant out here in the middle of this particular area does not provide you much information, because if you don't have those, then you don't know, well, are there many other infestations out here? Is there a huge patch right here? You don't have any of that kind of information to compare. And especially documenting weed-free areas, especially these days with as many infestations that we have, those provide such good anchor points to then to start to develop long-term goals or objectives from, because then you can work with landowners or refuges and say, look, you have this huge amount of area that's weed-free. Let's use that as an anchor point and start working out and work on particular infestations, or let's keep this clean. Why don't you concentrate in this area and not do these types of management actions, or the only thing you really need to continue to monitor is this particular area because it's high conservation, and let's keep it weed-free. A tremendous amount of information depending on how you collect those data and knowing what pieces of type of information you need so that you collect the right data, and some of those kind of thoughts that need to go into play and what you want your crews to collect. Because as you collect data, as we all know, that increases your time in the field. And how you collect those data increases your time in the field. If you're surveying an area and you're just taking points, you're going to go stand in the middle of an infestation and take a point. It takes much less time than if you're going to walk the perimeter of each infestation so that you can get a polygon that you think you want to monitor its size or shape. Is the question you're asking, do you need the data at that scale of resolution? And some of those kind of things. I don't want to get into too much because it's a whole other discussion, but definitely requires forethought in figuring out what's the minimal amount that you can still get the information that you need to maximize the amount of time in your field while you're in the field to get the work done and the project work done, because it will truly impact quickly how much you can get done. So just some examples of just a couple of projects and to show you a couple of maps that we deal with, and we've modified our mapping procedures a little bit just based on things as we've learned things and we've come across things. But we do a fair amount of inventory work now where we're trying to cover some of those areas that have never been covered. They don't know if they're infested or not. And they're in high priority areas that they're interested in keeping cleaning. So this, for example, was a project where we surveyed about 2,000 acres, and so you've got about 8 people walking 25 to 50 meters apart trying to sweep through there and find any particular invasive species that is the target for that particular project. For example, that statement right there. If you're going to survey an area working with your landowner, are you going to, if it's a new area, if it's an important or sensitive area, are you going to survey for every species that's out there? Or do you only need to survey garlic mustard because that's what it's about? That's the one that's going to have the greatest impact, or that's the one that is the landscape or the partnership is working on at the moment. It takes a whole lot more time to look for every species versus to get that search image for garlic mustard into crews and be able to move quicker or move at a wider distance between transects for while you're surveying. All of those things will definitely affect your project timing, the amount of people, and those sorts of things. And so for us, as you can see on this one, this isn't actually the same project. This is at Medicine Lake where we did leafy spurge, but so we kept track of where we actually looked, and that's the hash marked area. So that's everywhere we walked looking for leafy spurge, and then the lime green polygons are where we found the spurge. And so you can immediately see there is an area that has not even been searched yet. That would need to be cleaned up, or depending on if there's institutional knowledge there, or if the manager says, well, this isn't really an important area, or what have you, then maybe it doesn't. And you see that it's fairly clean. There's not much there along the edges. So if you just went in and eradicated these few little patches that are on the edges, maybe the threat is not that great, and so they don't want to spend the time or use our time for that particular area, or maybe they think they can cover it or it's just not needed. These mapping data we provide back to every refuge, maps of all our projects. We actually write up a narrative, provide them recommendations, a variety amount of information for them from each project. But you can see that depending on if you want to add this kind of to the repertoire of your strike team, can take a fair amount of work, because this, again, requires database management, cleaning up the data, getting the data mapped, getting something written and back to them, and then especially, somewhat of some analysis to let them know what your recommendations are. But you can see that then that landowner has a nice piece of information to decide population management priorities, which pieces does he want to go after first, which areas does he want to start cleaning up first, what's more important to him based on the land itself versus just the infestation itself. A lot of information in maps, of course, and but it just takes a lot of work to get that information back to them. Another one, just as an example of the way we view strike teams here in Montana, we have a threatened plant called Spalding's Campion that was found on Lost Trail. I guess it's going on 10 to 12 years ago when I was actually working as a biologist in that area. And we've always treated this area carefully because it does have this threatened plant. It is threatened from invasive species. And so the strike team is really the only option the refuge has. The refuge is pretty much a two-man station refuge. They just don't have the bodies to even begin to kind of work on this. And so the strike team started working on it because the effort that was needed to even begin to treat invasive species around this plant. I mean, we've got, the protocol is like from 5 meters out, it's all handwork, from 10 up to 10 meters, then it's backpack spray, and then beyond that, then sometimes you can use ATVs. You have to flag every plant before you go out there, and just an extensive amount of work. But it's been a great project for us because we've been able to make some headway. And since we were flagging the plants anyway, we started collecting those data as well. And so again, depending on your program and how far you want to go with these things, as I'm sure you can guess, then all of a sudden you have data that you can do a variety of things with. And so what we did is we took the Spalding location data and we did some habitat suitability modeling. And all habitat suitability modeling is where you take the environmental parameters across the landscape. It's based on presence and absence, and so areas where that plant was found, you can then predict where it might also be found in other areas. Now, we've done this for some invasive species, but we did this for the Spalding's project just to see, because we were curious of, I wonder if Lost Trail does have more of these plants, because it's fairly limited in Montana. And so we did some habitat suitability modeling, and we came up with some predictions, which are the yellow and green shading here in the background. And, of course, yellow or red is where it's more likely to occur. Green, it's still suitable to occur. Doesn't mean it is there. It just means that the environmental parameters are conducive to it. And so while we were there, we were able to run some transects to test the model, and we ended up finding over 200 more plants of this threatened plant, and it's this population now up into potentially being one of the key conservation areas in Montana. So it's been really exciting, and it's been great for the program and the crews, because the crews take a lot of ownership of their projects where they travel, and to know that, they know they're improving habitat, but then to have something like this just added on top of it, to be able to feel and see that they're supporting this important threatened plant. It was just a great side project that we did that's really been exciting for us. And so those are the kind of opportunities, that will pop up, actually more than you can ever deal with, but then help market your program and get people's interest again and get people's attention and those sorts of things. So just a couple other projects. Leafy spurge on McNeil Slough. I know some of our terrain's not anything like your guys' projects where it's so thick and hard to get through, but we do have remote, difficult terrain to access, and then again we end up, giving them back maps of information along with the narratives. And some of our projects are like this, where we only go in and we survey the most likely areas that are going to be threatened with leafy spurge. We don't necessarily cover the entire area. We just cover the likely areas. It just depends on the project, how it comes in and how they want it done. Toad flax is another one where we specifically went in just for the toad flax. We did not do a full spectrum, complete coverage. You can see on this one some of the access issues we'll talk about. Very extensive wetland where we're trying to creep and crawl through there and be able to find the plant and get it treated. That's where the expertise of the team comes in, and that's one of the advantages of the strike team, is because then they can deal with those kind of situations sometimes much better than some of the other groups. Relative to this complete coverage idea, this is something that's been somewhat, for some of our refuges, not hard to grasp, just not used to. The strike team was designed and very interested in, from my standpoint, from quality control, was I wanted every project to always have this, where we had complete coverage of an area. We're running transects up and down so that we know when we got done with this yellow box, we had searched that entire area, and we could say with 90% confidence that the infestations that were in there for that particular target species were what was in there. But that takes time, and that is more of your classic early detection rapid response type project, because you want to know, you want to make sure you don't miss something like this. If this is the only infestations out there in the green, you don't want to leave one. You want to be able to find them all and eradicate them all. But it takes time, so you may end up, like I mentioned earlier, walking over and viewing and seeing 2,000 acres, but you may only find 20 acres or 10 acres of, the invader. And that takes a lot of time, and it's hard for folks to get their head wrapped around. So first off, you didn't even treat them, you just mapped them, or even if you did treat them, they're thinking you only treated 20 acres and it took you a week and a half for that project. And so this measure of success we're going to come back to multiple times, making sure folks understand. So if you have a wide area like this where you're really trying to cover it, you still go cover to cover, and you have complete coverage, and so you know you have everything in that map. What many landowners, ranchers, refuges, whoever they may be, are used to going out on their property knowing that this patch is there, they treat it, and then another day they may go to this patch because they know it's there and they treat it, and so on. And to them, that's good enough. They feel like, well, then I'm treating something and I've gotten it. But as you can see, there's many areas out here that never get looked at. So you don't know if this particular patch blinks out or you do get eradication, or even this one too. If you never visit this other area, there could be new infestations. And so, again, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. You're not being as effective as possible. But we've had many requests even to go to this and quit doing the complete coverage because they don't want to spending the time out there, or they don't want the ATV tracks all the way across their area. There's a variety of reasons that they've used that they don't want us doing that, but it really affects your ability to know whether or not you're being effective at the scale of that particular unit, and that's something that has to get resolved with each landowner and each project. And this is just a diagrammatic of the same thing. The point is, if my slide's going to work. Yeah. If we just do point to point, the problem is then these other infestations can be popping up, and we don't even know they're there because we haven't been surveying those areas. And that's the danger of doing those kind of projects. And you may or may not hit that as bad as we do, but it's been a big issue for us for the last 2 years. And so what we end up with is, more of a map like this, where we've only gone in kind of point to point And so now we have these big open spots, which disrupts any of our monitoring efforts and these sorts of things. But we might have gotten more treated, which to a land manager may be what they're interested in and his measure of success. So something to keep in mind. Any questions on some of those kind of concepts of complete coverage or point-to-point or types of projects before I kind of move into something else a little bit? Okay. So one of the good things and the fun things also for a strike team for us is we do participate in a lot of community spray days, rodeos, pools, float trips where they're floating weed pools and those kind of things. We're collecting biocontrol. We still do those. Some areas of the state have more than others. For us, I guess for any group, it's always great to go to those kind of things when you can. It does take a day out of your week. Sometimes it disrupts the schedule because there's, you know, they want to have their spray day on a Wednesday, so you can't travel. It's going to disrupt the whole week of that schedule. So you have to kind of weigh the cost and benefit of, is it that important for us to go to that spray day and show our face and show that we're a good neighbor and that we do want to work with everyone, or do we want to just go get this project done? And pretty much the spray day always wins out because we are the face of the Fish and Wildlife Service in those particular events, and a lot of good relationships are built and trust is built because they see you out there fighting the same thing with them. They see you working hard. It's just the payback on these kind of things is extremely high for the limited amount that you have to put into it.
Could you explain what a spray day is?
Yeah, so multi-agency spray day is just where everyone gets together. So there may be, like, for instance, Teton County Road that goes up into the Forest Service wilderness area, highly recreation type area. It's county road that goes into Forest Service land, but everybody gets together and works on hand pulling knapweed on that road for that particular day, whether you're Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, Park Service, RCS, or what have you. Or it might be a particular area from a spraying standpoint where everybody decides on a particular project area, and then you all come with a tank and a couple of ATVs, and maybe the county provides the spray, and everybody else just provides in-kind labor, and for that day you all work in that one particular project area, regardless of jurisdiction or boundary.
And you're off refuge lands?
Yes, we are. Yep.
I actually have one other question.
You bet.
I was curious to know, this is Rachel, by the way, I work for the county. I was curious to know if anyone on your crew is certified by the state to spray, and if they are they commercial? I was just curious about
we usually work with our state licensing office. It's technically a governmental license. It depends on which state you're dealing with, but from a Montana standpoint, it's kind of weird. We definitely get a license. They want us to get a license, but they kind of hem and haw between the commercial and the individual, because then they'll say, well, but you're government. I don't know. Just do this. And it's varied a little bit depending on who's in charge that year. But we do get a Montana state license for pesticide application, at least by my crew leaders. I offer it to my crew members because it's good training and education for them as well. And if they do want it, then I do pay for it for them. But the crew leaders are required to have it. Just because our state law requires the licensed person has to technically be within 150 miles or something weird of their operators. And so if the crew members are the operators, you know, when they're out at Medicine Lake, which is I don't know how many miles away, they have to have a licensed person with them. And not all the refuges have a licensed person, so we can't always count on that.
Okay. And you're only allowed to spray on government land, I assume? If you have a government license, you can only spray on government land.
Right.
Okay.
That's what I was mentioning before. Yes, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, that's what I thought.
days don't seem to be an issue because everybody's there and they know everybody's there and they know what's going on. And oftentimes it is like Forest Service property. It's not necessarily landowner property, but some of them do include some private landowner property. The landowner's there, they're involved. So are things getting bent there or rules getting bent? Probably.
Okay.
But the community is so open to trying to work together and work on these battles together that no one seems to be asking or pushing that issue. But it's definitely it's an issue.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's something that I constantly have to deal with and look at.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on stuff like that? So yeah, just a few other things as far as lessons learned. Access issues with any kind of strike team, especially a regional like mine, or probably goes with anyone pretty much, but no matter how many times you make sure that the gate's going to be open, the gate's not open. How much disturbance that landowner truly thinks, and when I say landowner, I mean any kind of landowner, whether it's a refuge project leader or a refuge manager or a district manager or if it's a county person or what have you. Their level of disturbance, their level of being comfortable with seeing those ATV tracks versus what's going to happen. And you really got to discuss that with them and make sure they understand. If things are muddy, really talking to them saying, do you want us to go along the fence or do you want us to stay on the 2-track that goes through the middle of the property? But it's going to rut it up. But would you prefer that than us making a new track along the fence? All of these kind of minor things that can really blow up in your face if you don't talk to them first. The ATV versus the foot, I've already talked about that a little bit. We've had a lot of discussions with that. For us, of course, with the least amount of disturbance to nesting birds. And, again, happy to do it, happy to do footwork, but, of course, that decreases the amount of time and land that you can cover dramatically. And so then you may find yourself in a catch-22 of somebody's frustrated because you didn't cover as much area and you're trying to tell them, but you told us to go on foot. That's all we could get done, and getting them to understand those logistical constraints on things like that. And then just land ownership, depending on the type of property that it is, are the boundaries well marked? Are they going to bleed over into somebody's property because there's not a fence on one side? Well, if you don't check that out and you don't make sure that your crew knows that, then again, you may be in an area where they bleed onto the landowner's property and then they bring landowners against all pesticide use or something like that. And really just having, again, those conversations with the person before they get there so you can prevent any kind of situation for your crew. And that gets at are they going to treat it while they're there, or are they there just to survey and no treatment? And then if they are going to treat, is that landowner and people that are going to be in that area know that they're using a pesticide, because that's more and more people are getting more sensitive to the use of pesticides. And having that conversation with them to get them to understand that often with early detection rapid response type projects, that's the best time to use pesticides. Even though they might be against it, if you can get them to understand, but look, with this small infestation, I can eradicate it in 2 years or 3 years max with a teeny tiny amount of pesticide versus if we don't, this is going to continue to spread to where maybe some other integrated pest management method, it's going to get beyond the ability to use hand control, or it's going to get beyond the ability to use biocontrol. And then we're going to have to use a lot more pesticide, and having some of those discussions to see what's the best for that particular project site. And all of these things are going to impact how much you can get done and how much you report for that particular project or year. And just to come back to the communication for a minute, where are we at, 12:15? We've talked about needing people to commit to their projects and getting those proposals, making sure they understand some of those communication points, like I mentioned. If you come into an area, are you treating everything, or are you just treating a particular target species? A lot of assumptions go on both sides that you need to make sure are clear. We were running into some of that, and so we actually developed kind of an expectation and accomplishment checklist where we come in, we sit down with the landowner, We talk about, okay, here's what you wanted us to do. Is that still the same? Yep. Or no, I need you to change to this area and go after this particular species if it's all still within the appropriate timing. And then we sit down with them at the end and say, okay, this is what we accomplished. Here's what we didn't get finished because it rained or what have you. And it's just a good opening and closing to the project because depending on how your strike team works, like mine, I mean, they kind of roll in, they do the project, they roll out. And we were losing some communication there where we didn't even see the project leader because we were doing our business. We've been doing it for 3 years, and they're used to us, and until communication started getting lost, and that's when then you start getting hard feelings or misunderstandings. So my last point, which is probably the biggest one with strike teams that most of you may already be comfortable with, but we've had some issues with the blowback from it in the sense of, so if you look at survey and treated acres column here, you'll notice that I put surveyed and treated, and this is because I truly feel I can pass the red face test and say if I'm out there looking for an infestation, I've treated that area. No, I haven't sprayed it. I haven't pulled something, but I've looked at it. That's part of my management is monitoring it and seeing where it is. And so that's your survey area. So as you can see, many of us survey anywhere from 1,000 to 35 or 25,000 acres a year. We're covering that amount of property, and we feel good about what information we've gathered from that. As far as herbicide actually applied, very much smaller number. So, for example, for us, we cover around 20 to 25,000 acres a year, and we will actually apply herbicide anywhere from 5 to 1,500,000 acres worth of herbicide. That is not very much, and that is where if people start comparing you to other type of projects where they're spraying vast amounts of area that are not early detection rapid response projects, then this whole treated acres, if they're using that as their measure of success, becomes very concerning because they're saying, well, you're not getting anything done. You only treated 500 acres. I'm like, no, we covered 25,000 acres, and we protected these properties from infestation on 25,000 acres or what have you, however you want to report it. But this is an important point because even like on this one, since North Dakota is done a little differently and they spray with large boom tractors across large flat pieces, people were seeing these numbers where they were saying, well, we treated 25,000 acres, and they're comparing that to all the other strike teams. You know, it starts to raise questions. Well, what are they doing right that you guys are doing wrong? And it's no, they're just not doing EDRR projects. We are. And you just don't want to get into that kind of comparison or measure of success. I don't really have time to go through this slide, but this is just an example of that particular situation, because when you start looking at, let's say you have $10,000 to spend on a project, and you have a large infestation over here that's about 300 acres, and that's the one they've been spraying for years. But then you get these little 5-acre pieces popping up, which is pretty large for EDRR. But if you took that straight up and looked at as far as cost per acre and said, well, if I treat 300 acres, my cost per acre is only $33 per acre. But if I treat only these each little 5-acre pieces and maybe do 10 acres around the edge of this for containment, then my cost per acre is $250 per acre. So it looks very costly. The problem is that's the wrong measure of success. If we look at it as far as acres protected or what did we actually accomplish with that spray effort, then in a large infestation like that, that's 300 acres, that's been there forever, yeah, you might see a small decrease or maybe a little bit of a shrinkage in the perimeter. I would say not much more than 10 acres in, say, 3 years. But so as far as what you actually protected or had an effect over, I would say, okay, maybe 10 acres I had an impact on versus the EDRR. If you over 3 years got these eradicated, then you've just protected 1,700 acres. And then if you look at the numbers, then your EDRR is even better than the previous one for large. You're down to $6 an acre. And it's hard for people to grasp this and the benefit. You guys know the benefit of EDRR. You know the cost benefit. And I do too. But we're the choir. We're preaching to the choir. And so when you start working with additional people and additional partners, and they're using only that measure of success of how many acres did you treat, that's where then it becomes a problem. And so you really have to get them to understand the benefit of it. It's not how much pesticide I put out there, it's how much impact I actually had with that particular effort. And that's partly a problem just in the way, especially with federal agencies and state agencies, the way we report it. And we've worked ourselves into this box now where then we get penalized because it looks like we're not treating anything or enough. And so many of the groups that I work with out in the West, we've been trying to work for 2 or 3 years trying to figure out how do we do this without just changing completely the administrative reporting mechanism to get people to understand the importance of EDRR. And so to sum up, the advantages and disadvantages, we've pretty much talked about all of these. I don't think there's anything that I haven't covered that's in this slide. They do, there is a fair amount of money that would be required to start the strike team up as far as getting your equipment and getting set up with ATVs or sprayers and some of those kind of things, depending on what type of projects you were going to work on. But it's such an efficient model when people understand EDRR. I wouldn't do it any other way. I believe firmly in it. We're all working for these kind of graphs where you have a small infestation, you immediately see a response, and then it blinks out and it's gone. And it's just when you're in a unit of property that's clean and you know you've cleaned it and you've protected it for a few more years, there's nothing beyond what getting out there and doing the EDR type projects can do for you. So with that, I will open it back up. Any questions or comments?
Hey, Lindy, this is Mark McGinney, and I'm with the Silvio Conti Refuge as well. I guess I'm going back to how the strike teams, and speaking nationally, how they were initially established. And I think you said that maybe not all of them, but most were through congressional appropriation. Was that back in the day of earmarks? Yes.
And especially like North Dakota and Montana. I guess I'm not as familiar with the other ones, and maybe, Steve, you remember, and I've got all the files, I could go look, but pretty much, I mean, it was kind of Senator Burns from Montana, it was his baby. He pushed it through, and so did, what's his name from North Dakota. I mean, they wanted one for their state and said, you will do this on Fish and Wildlife Service lands, yeah.
And so several years later, how is the funding coming through? Is it just a regional? Is it ingrained now so that it's become a regional priority?
Yeah, it is. I've had to fight for it. It comes in under the base budget. It usually is labeled as invasive allocation to the region. Technically the Refuge ARD has some discretion with that, but we have, the budget books that say, this money is supposed to be spent on strike teams, and so as long as someone such as myself is saying, okay, this is what it says, we shouldn't be spending this on something else, it has not been taken and used for other things. Now, in some of the other regions, they have started skimming it more than what mine has done. Mine's done it a little bit, and they just need it for other things within the region. But it's not as protected, if you will, I guess, as what some might think. I mean, technically they could take it and use it for other regional priorities if need be. Yeah. But it does come in under the base budget for invasive species.
Yeah. Do you have any suggestions for folks in those regions or refuge complexes who don't have a strike team, or maybe examples of what some other maybe there's some more recent ones that had been formed outside of the congressional process?
This is Steve from Great Swamp, Mark. I can speak to that in a little bit because we've done something here at Great Swamp along those lines.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, and I would just add to Lindy's point, one of the challenges with strike team work and early detection rapid response is you can't quantify what might have been. what that infestation might have eventually grown into had it not been snuffed out in an early stage by a strike team, how much money it might have cost, how much ecological damage that it might have eventually resulted in as a result of early intervention and rapid response. And so that's one of the frustrations and one of the challenges that we face in running strike teams and employing early detection rapid response as a model. But if I might, is it okay if I jump in now and speak a little bit?
You bet.
Okay, sure. Well, that was great, Lindy, and it's exciting for me. I was involved in some of the early work in establishing the Montana Strike Team, and it's exciting to see how Lindsay can develop the program and how much it's grown and all the great things you guys are really doing. And having come from Montana in the mid-2000s to Great Swamp, which is an 8,000-acre refuge in northern New Jersey, we have our fair share of invasive plant problems, just as pretty much every refuge in the refuge system does. Our biologist had worked for many years. I'm working on a variety of species. Some we had great success with. For example, purple loosestrife was a huge problem in our impoundments, and he worked closely with Cornell University and was one of the pioneers in biocontrol for purple loosestrife, which has worked fantastically on the refuges and is now being widely employed. And other species like Phragmites, for example, common reed, is something that we struggle with mightily and continue to struggle with. And so we've had mixed success in dealing with invasive species at Great Swamp, which I think is true of most refuges. But we're also blessed with a wonderful friends group. And for those not familiar with refuges, friends groups are kind of volunteer wings or organizations that support refuges. And we have a great friends group who's very interested in working with us on just about every project. About 7 or 8 years ago, a group of friends became particularly interested in working with us on invasive species. And so they actually formed a team in collaboration with our biologist to begin treating infestations, invasives, kind of in high priority, very publicly visible areas. And so they're working not so much with the degree of threat and new invaders per se as things like common invasives like multiflora rose and Japanese barberry in highly visible areas like around our visitor center and along some of our trails. And over the 3 or 4 years that program ramped up, they really did a lot of good and made noticeable improvements in those specific small areas where they were targeting their efforts. It was largely a volunteer effort. It was largely manual control, lots of hand pulling, a little bit of snip and drip, not very herbicide intensive, and had made a lot of progress in small areas treating common invasives. But what I had brought from my background in Montana and working with the strike teams is that nagging feeling that the next invasive, the next purple loosestrife, the next Phragmites is knocking on the door and is about to come in. Now is the time to do something about it before it becomes well established and widespread. About that time, the New Jersey invasive species strike team kind of came on the scene, and we were one of their early partners. In the summer of 2010, they actually sent a crew to the refuge and spent a week doing a reconnaissance of kind of our front country primary vector areas, and came up with about a half dozen new invaders that we were not aware of. They were still present, they were just getting started, small infestations of plants that a lot of us had never even seen before because they were so new. We weren't familiar with them. And so that really sent the red flag up and got myself motivated to implement a strike team early detection rapid response type function at Great Swamp. We're as limited in staff and funding and resources as any other refuge, and so we didn't have a whole lot of additional capacity to do that. But as I said earlier, we did have a great friends group, a volunteer wing that was willing to help. And so in the 2012, we began our first field season as a largely volunteer effort where we would meet twice a month on Fridays, and we would have anywhere from a half dozen to a dozen volunteers turn up with myself and whoever staff members or interns might be available, and we began targeting these incipient infestations. In conjunction with that, we provided a lot of training and plant identification and GPS mapping, and we would actually have volunteers go out and map these front country vector areas, roads, trails, parking lots, disturbed areas, waterways, detecting new infestations, and then we would go back out on the next workday and we would target those with this largely volunteer strike team effort. And so we just completed our second season. We've had about 30 different volunteers involved at one point or another. We've treated 9 different emerging invasive species, and that's really our target, are these early detection emergent species. We're working in cooperation or in tandem with the other volunteer group that continues to work on the more common species in these priority front country areas. So these two programs are really supporting one another and working well together. And it's largely a volunteer effort. It hasn't cost the refuge a whole lot of additional funding. Really the only funding would be for herbicide, particularly for some of the woodies we've been treating like buckthorn. And it's worked out very well. It's really raised the level of interest amongst our volunteers in treating invasives, and it's particularly keyed them into the importance of this kind of stitch in time saves 9 mentality, I like to say, where if we can get out ahead of it before it becomes well established and widespread, we can snuff it out and avoid all of that damage and cost that might have been had it moved into the future. And so there's a lot of excitement about that. I said we just finished our second season. We'll take a break for the winter and we'll regroup and we'll get started again next year. It's a whole multiple orders of magnitude less than what Lenny presented for the strike teams in Montana, but I think it's an example that might serve for other refuges who have a willing core group of volunteers that they might be able to develop their own in-house strike team and live within their limited means and yet still make a difference for incipient invasives.
Well, I do too. I think that's a great opportunity. Before I ask you questions too, I just wanted to follow up on that same idea. And Mark, relative to your question, so the San Luis Valley, Colorado complex of 3 refuges has been dying for a strike team and kept asking. And of course, there's no new money to develop anything new like that. And so they did something similar. Rather than volunteers, they took their maintenance staff and some of the other staff and just said, okay, we're going to have strike team effort. Also, kind of like what Steve's done in the sense of they pick a week or 2 out of each month, and that's what they work on. They've made it a priority, and they pull everyone together, and they do exactly the same thing. They look at the maps. They look at the county information. What are the new invaders that might be coming? Let's go check the vectors. Let's go check these areas where we know there might be some or where we do know there is some, and they get it treated. And that's worked out quite well for them as well, just with existing staff. Very strategic use of time and very pinpoint in time, but that's enough, and it's getting them started. It's getting everybody used to the concept, and those are both good ways to try to at least get something started within your existing resources.
And a couple lessons I would share based on my experience in starting this kind of small-scale in-house strike team is to be realistic, especially if you're working with volunteers. Realize that they're generally not coming at it with a whole lot of invasive species background, so a lot of training up front, particularly in plant identification, training in use of GPS. Some of them are reluctant to use chemicals, and so we'll have folks who are willing to do that to help us with putting on backpacks, and folks who aren't may go out ahead and they may flag plants for treatment, or they may get involved only in mapping, and so we try to cater to their particular interests. And also along the lines of being realistic is to realize you can't treat every plant or every infestation, and so from the very beginning we established what we called kind of a short list or a priority list of emergent invasives that we were going to target. That came about as a result of our own in-house knowledge and also working with the New Jersey Invasive Species Strike Team, who's just a tremendous resource that we're lucky to have in New Jersey. And so in our first season, we came up with a target list of 12 species that we focused on. That grew by a few to 15 in our second year, but trying to focus and target the most important plant species, realizing we can't do it all. There is something we can do, keeping it manageable and reasonable given the limited amount of resources we have to bring to bear.
That's really helpful, Steve. Thank you for relaying that. I think those of us who do own properties can start thinking about this on our own lands and how that might work on the small scale. Susan, this might be a good time for you to tell us about the New Jersey strike team. Susan is the executive director of that statewide team.
Sure. This is Susan. And our group got started in 2008 just as a central New Jersey project. We are really, really lucky in New Jersey to have a few people whose passion is control of invasive species. For whatever reason, that's the thing that floats their boat. And these people had been serving with a state effort to develop an invasive species management plan for the whole state. And such a plan was created. Unfortunately, it was shelved in 2009. Never has really been implemented by our state government. And so the central New Jersey effort that got started in 2008 was quickly picked up on by people in other parts of the state who had known about the invasive species management plan that was sitting on government shelves. And they said, look, you guys, this is great. You're doing it in central New Jersey. But, you know, our entire state has a problem with invasive species. Let's take this thing statewide. So in 2011, we incorporated the New Jersey Invasive Species Strike Team as an independent not-for-profit. And full disclosure here, we are really less of a strike team than we are a coordinating organization. For the first 2 years of our formal existence, we hired college students or recent college graduates, and we put them through pesticide training to get their licenses. We did an extensive training program with them ourselves to help them learn to identify the emerging invasive species that are threatening different habitats in our state, and then we sent them out to lands across the state where people had requested us to come. We didn't charge anybody for our services. We had some wonderful grant funding that facilitated this. But of course, when that grant funding dried up, we had created an expectation amongst landowners, both conservation organizations and governmental entities and private landowners, that each summer we would have crews out on the land searching for and eradicating emerging invasive species. And so it's been a bit painful for us to go from actually striking invasive species to actually morphing into an entity that does a lot more outreach to help the general public understand the threats posed by invasive species. And then training, we do classroom training and field sessions to identify, to help people learn to identify the targeted species, properly record data about what they're finding, and then safely initiate control and eradication efforts. We still do all of the mapping and data analysis of information that is submitted to us and produce an annual report which identifies where invasive species are, abundance and distribution and that kind of thing. And we prioritize populations that have been detected, try to get people to focus on the really small populations first to get rid of what we call the zeros, you know, the really tiny populations before we go after the bigger populations. So that's where we are now, and really it's a strike team that does very little actual searching and eradication work. We employ just 2 people on a part-time basis, myself and an education director. We have a wonderful PhD botanist who serves as our science director, and we have a contract with him. Then we have contracts with the GIS person and contracts with some other technical and educational people to help us actually do all of the coordination and analysis and communication that's required. So that's how our strike team is operating now. And I'm really thrilled to be able to tell you that we have 3 exciting grants that are going to help us as we move into the future. One is a grant from the National Resources Conservation Service to develop smartphone and tablet apps specifically targeting the invasive species that we have identified that are threatening New Jersey. So there are these wonderful smartphone and tablet apps that exist for regions in the U.S., but we felt we needed one with our specific invasive species populations that we need to be on the lookout for. And so we're developing this app through the University of Georgia, the Bugwood folks that I'm sure everybody's familiar with. So now the army of early detectors can grow quite rapidly. And NRCS funded this targeting an audience of farmers and forest owners. There are over 1 million acres, actually almost 2 million acres in New Jersey that are in private hands, 100,000 or so farmers and private forest lot owners. And obviously the invasive species issue needs to be addressed through these private landowners. So we're hoping to make it really, really easy for people to understand the invasive species issues, and if they're out walking on their property, you know, to take their smartphone out, because nobody goes anywhere without them these days. And if they see something that looks questionable, they can look it up in the smartphone app. They can take a picture of it. They can send it to us. We can say yes or no, and then guide them through this process. We also have a grant from the U.S. Forest Service for a forest health initiative to work on these forest lands, identify the high priority forested areas, and then really figure out what species are threatening each forested area in New Jersey. And then the last one is a small grant to work with watershed groups, because every small region has its own threats. And so we're going to work with the watershed associations and organizations, there are many, many in New Jersey, to help them learn about the specific species based on the habitats that they encompass, what they need to be on the lookout for, and then how best to respond. So that's how we're working now.
Thank you, Susan. That's really, really pertinent. Putting all these three things together, each of them have pertain to things we're doing in the Northeast and the Connecticut River watershed. Specifically, just to give you all a sense of what's going on in the watershed, we got a grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to try to network together 6 different watershed-based cooperative invasive species management areas. These are partnerships on the watershed scale, so that fits well with what you were just saying, Susan. And Charlie will be speaking next, and he's the director of the Outsmart Invasive Smartphone App program that was started out at UMass. So I think that team that's been covering that program has been really interested in, okay, what next? Now we've taught all these people to go out and look for these invasives. They've reported them in, but now we're finding that there's really nothing going on that's going to address those infestations. So that's how he got interested in strike teams and how to develop a strike team. And his idea is to use them use college students for help. So we'll all be interested in hearing what your experience was tapping into the university system like that. So one thing we're doing in the Connecticut River watershed is trying to network together these various groups, but it's been challenging because they range all the way from Long Island Sound up to the headwaters in northern Vermont and New Hampshire. So they have differing issues, and we're trying to find some common ground on what will be most useful to them to be learning about through a full watershed-wide group. A steering committee that's been doing more of these webinars and news briefs to tell about training opportunities and other resources that are out there, and doing some prioritization on the watershed level, which areas of the watershed are most important to try to protect from invasives, and how to start wrapping our minds around the early detection and rapid response issue. So that's where this webinar came to be, to try to find out what others are doing. So we do only have about 15 minutes left for this discussion, but I'd like to hear more from others and to hear from Charlie, to just have him tell about the concept that he had put forth about this network of strike teams out of universities. So we'll stop for a moment first because Steve and Susan both spoke, and I'd like to know if there's any questions that people have for them that that are on your minds. And maybe if you're all willing, this could go over the 3 o'clock time period if necessary, but we'll try to fit it all in if we can.
Hi, this is Tessa. I have a question for Lindy. I'm the invasive coordinator for the Connecticut River watershed.
Wait, now can you repeat that?
My name is Tessa. I'm the invasive coordinator for the Connecticut River watershed, and I just have a question for Lindy.
Yeah.
So my question was, where did you find the information on what time of the year you should treat the different invasives you were looking at? Was it just from experience, or did you have particular websites that you looked at or people you talked to?
Yes.
All of the above.
All of the above. Talked to a lot of county folks for trying to find out what worked for them in their particular area. But a lot of the books and websites, we have a few good publications out here that are very specific. They're like books that are just a full-blown cheat sheet of, if you want to treat yellow-toed flax, here are all the different options, and this is when and what you should, use. We've got a consultant in Montana that has been very active in developing kind of a cheat sheet for what she had seen with some of her research and her great experience as far as her suggestions of what would be most effective, and then just some of trial and error of what we had seen worked or didn't work, especially with application timing, making sure that 90% of the infestation was flowering rather than only 20% or what have you. I mean, we're not that specific, but we now kind of know the area well enough that we can, depending on the weather for that particular year, then we can be out there at the best time possible.
Thank you.
Any other questions thus far?
This is Susan. One thing that I would like to say is that I think it can be really helpful if there is either a regional approach to strike team coordination or statewide approach, because that whole issue of control and finding the best way to control something, one person's experience in one region can really help inform what somebody might try in another. And that's one of the things that our strike team does. We put together for each species the recommended control measures, and every year then we revisit our fact sheets and our recommendations based on the experience that we gather. So I think, in your watershed group, that might be something to consider as a really, really vital function to include.
This is Tessa again. How do you share that information between the different groups?
This is Susan. Via our website. So we have the list of invasive species to be on the lookout for, and then we've got a fact sheet for each one of those species. And this information will also be included in the smartphone apps, not just what the species looks like and what its habitat is and what its threat is, but also the recommended control measures. And then we're also developing a second app for people who actually do control work to document the control work too. I didn't mention that earlier, but so I think that's just a step, and obviously the web is a wonderful, wonderful resource for everybody to go to.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Steve. I would also add that we've had success with the cooperative extension unit of the state university, and I know many states have similar units that have very knowledgeable people, in some cases weed scientists who are, in my experience, happy to share their knowledge and information.
Any other questions? Okay. Originally, we had thought we'd go through and try to have everybody introduce themselves, but I think at this point it might be best, since we're running out of time here, to just have Charlie talk about the concept that he had put forth and get some feedback on that. I know he'd really like to have some feedback from others on this.
Yeah, thanks, Cynthia. This is Charlie. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Assuming people can. I first wanted to thank the previous speakers. Lindy, your slides were, while you were talking, your slides were really, really interesting. And I'm wondering if it's possible, if you'd be willing to actually put them in a PDF and somehow share them. Because I was taking notes as you were going through it, but I would really like to digest them a little deeper. Is that possible?
Sure, absolutely.
I don't know, Cynthia, if you've got like an easy way to, I don't know how big the file would be, but or if there's an email list, we could send it that way.
Yeah, we'll try to figure something out.
And Steve and Susan, I really appreciated your talks as well, and I think they kind of connected, and I'll just try to be very brief because I'd rather have discussion. But the short of it is this past summer, myself and a variety of colleagues here in the Connecticut River watershed area, including Cynthia, we went after a National Institute of Food and Agriculture, USDA grant. And I think the real connection to what I heard from Susan and Steve was the idea we were pushing was a more formal or a more a deeper connection, perhaps is the word, with higher educational institutions to set up a strike team type of model where students, for instance, I teach in a program, natural resource conservation program, and also an environmental science program, and we have a lot of students who have a lot of interest in this stuff. And what we were trying to contemplate in this proposal was establishing a pilot strike team that would integrate with the educational mission of higher education institutions in the watershed. And so, Steve, you just mentioned the extension people. You know, at UMass, I know there's at least one course that's taught that's related to plant eradication issues. When we wrote the proposal, we didn't have enough time, and the time was too short to really dig in and make connections to the faculty. But the idea is that if we could find faculty that are teaching these kind of courses, could you possibly have what I was envisioning was a 2-year kind of thing where students would take these courses either on plant identification or plant eradication. Then in the summer, some subset of those students would then get, I think in the first year, volunteer internships with the partners that were involved. And so we had a federal, state, and nonprofit organizations here that we were thinking about and were partnered with in the original proposal. And with the idea that then the next year there would be some kind of independent study or some kind of system where that cohort of students that went through the first year would still be around for a second year to develop some kind of cohort overlap, I guess you could say, and then kind of continue that that cycle. But then the second year, it might move into the students that have gone through the second year might actually move into paid internships. So the idea would be to, as you folks have suggested, is to harness kind of the young interested folks to start gaining some skills and to begin to actually interact with kind of service learning like projects, so that they would start to build that resume builder, if you know, an experience with partners that would possibly move toward a formal internship and kind of launch them into graduation with some experience behind them. So that's the short idea. I took some notes as Lindy was talking in terms of a bunch of connections and thoughts we need to think about. But we have a proposal that went in. It didn't get funded. We had a lot of feedback based on that was largely positive. I mean, a couple of the negatives that we got was things like this isn't really innovative. It's already being done somewhere else, and I think that was probably talking about what we heard today. But the thing I think might be innovative here is this, trying to create this richer connection to the higher educational institutions. So I'll leave it at that. If there are people on the phone that are from this region, we've got this draft proposal, and I think one of the goals we were hoping is to solicit possible interest. Cynthia and I were toying with the idea of maybe going after another one, trying again. I think it's in May. So if there's anybody on the call that would be interested in talking more, I'm more than happy to share the first draft of this proposal, and maybe Cynthia offline we could have another conference call with people that might be interested. But I'll leave it to that, and I'd be really interested in any reactions people have to the idea, given the expertise on the call.
Before we get into that, Florence, I'd just like to know, and Tom, if you're still on, whether it's okay if we continue on with this at least till 3:15, just so we get some feedback on this.
Yeah, I think that's fine. We can just continue. Yep.
Great, thank you. So anybody have any reactions or more questions for anybody, or just feedback on the proposal about trying to use college student and college curriculum to further EDRR in the area?
Yeah, this is just Charlie again. I'm just wondering if anybody's actually seen this model. It sounded like there were connections, but kind of getting deeper into the educational process for students. Has that been tried anywhere?
Well, I guess this is Lindy again. I'm not sure what they meant by that comment. I can tell you that there's an organization in the Southwest called America's Conservation Enhancement Program or something. And the Youth Corps programs, and maybe that's what they're talking about, the Youth Corps programs come at it from giving the youth experience in training, and so then they have them work on these types of natural resource type projects. But then they have a program of their own that those kids have to go through and technically graduate from within a season. So that might be kind of what you're talking about. What you explained, that does sound similar to that, but to me it reminded me more of the kind of the Forest Service kind of field studies programs that I saw kind of growing up. And so I think you could easily work that into a field program. The benefit, if you took it that next step as far as to the partners, would be if you guys were handling that coordination role. Otherwise, I guess that would be my question, is who would be doing the coordination role and finding you guys, the group, the youth project, for them to work on,
Right, yeah. The original idea we had was that we would be trying to find what we called command and control centers housed within various university partnerships, so trying to identify key faculty who might be interested in this. But it also, your point makes me think of, at UMass Amherst, this area, we have 5 colleges here, and so we have these programs that actually cross UMass, Smith College, Amherst College, New Hampshire College, and Mount Holyoke. And so the model could be something like that almost. And I've pondered a little bit from time to time about whether some of the training could be, I don't know if you've heard this term MOOCs, massive open online courses. But there's this kind of movement that's happening where using online and open access, you could have, to some degree, tell me if I'm wrong on this, but you could have some degree of training potentially that would be an online system that could be shared across the universities. But this, of course, would all take money to produce, and I think that's part of what we'll be grappling with if we go for this next round is how do we make this more innovative, which is part of the message I was getting from the last, and more new in that.
Hey, Charlie,
I think. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. This is Steve. A comment along those lines. Last summer, we started a new program in partnership with our Friends group where we brought on 2 college juniors as what we called habitat interns. And their primary focus was on invasive species control and then the ultimate goal, which is habitat restoration. I think just as an aside, sometimes we get so caught up in killing the invasives, we forget that the ultimate goal is to restore healthy functioning native ecosystems. And so we call them habitat interns. One of the 2 interns was a student at SUNY Cobleskill, the State University of New York, Cobleskill, and she actually received college credit for her 12-week internship at the refuge. Our friends provided a small living allowance, a couple $100 a week. We provided housing and government quarters and all the logistics support, all the training and equipment necessary. And she worked with us for 12 weeks during the summer with a partner, did just fantastic work, loved the internship, and actually earned, I can't remember exactly how many credits, but a fair number of college credits towards her degree as a result of her volunteering at the refuge.
Right, and we have, in our environmental science program, we have an option, if not a requirement, for students to have something like that, where they get some practical experience in the field where they get credit. So that's the kind of thing I'm thinking about. And, one connection back to Lindy's talk, well, all of your talks about the question of inventorying area and the GIS and GPS kind of stuff versus the actual treatment. I mean, I found myself thinking, I teach a GIS course right now, and I'm trying to get my students to actually get some experience out in the field doing GPS mapping and then mapping those tracks that they're doing or the waypoints that they go to. So I can see a definite first-tier connection to just the trying to have students who are trained in identification, going through that entire polygon as Lindy was talking, flagging those so that somebody could geocache back, a smaller team perhaps, that are trained to eradicate. But these are the kinds of ideas I'm thinking, and try to connect it directly to the educational programs and the idea of trying to build service learning experience for students that would move to an internship that would then kind of springboard them toward graduation.
Oh, yeah, and just from the standpoint of, if it was tied with you guys, just having the bodies available, I mean, that's the benefit for your partnership area is because, having enough bodies to cover the ground, I could easily, that was a perfect example of showing the benefit of the GIS class folks. You'd have to do the plant ID component first, but then if they were doing the mapping and then, like you said, then the partnership had the funding to get a contractor in there to that waypoint to then do the treatment. You would be able to, that's where I would see the benefit is, because if these kids are required to do this as part of their schooling, then you have an unending labor force, and that's where even, programs like mine is, we're always scrambling for people, even with,
right.
A paying job. It's hard to get people to to hire on. So
yeah, and I think if we could embed it in the actual educational programs, then this starts to get at what Susan was talking about in terms of the longevity after the grant goes. It seems to me if we could figure out a system where it's actually part of the educational program connecting to the active agencies or organizations, and it might be self-sustaining. Well, the point about coordination, I guess, is still an open question, but it has the feel to me like this could go on beyond any grant that might be a pilot, if it's designed correctly.
Oh, definitely.
This is Karen Lombard. I just wanted to say something. Have you thought about partnering with something like AmeriCorps or SCA? Because I just feel like the logistics portion and the management portion, the training and the hiring, having run crews myself, not early detection crews, but just crews that do invasive, it's just very time-consuming. And those organizations just do that anyway. And then you would set up sort of the academic credit or whatever.
If I could chime in, I'm Hannah from Hilltown Land Trust. I was here with Julie Richburg, and I'm an AmeriCorps volunteer. And I actually think it would be great to engage college students in this kind of work. I've been thinking about doing it. That's why I have been on this conference call. And my question is, students will be willing to make a trip out here to the Hilltowns? And I guess my hang-up is on the figuring out how to get people who are willing to come out and dedicate time somewhere that isn't right next to the college,
Right. Well, I hope maybe after this call we can have an email I think that AmeriCorps connection is a great idea, and so maybe we can email and see if we can continue the dialogue.
Interestingly, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Cynthia.
Oh, I just wanted to mention that I just got an email today from the Student Conservation Association, which is based out of New Hampshire, and they're thinking about doing some sort of collaborative teams of Student Conservation Association students that would do stewardship projects. And I don't know much about it yet, but they're having 2 scoping meetings next week to see if there's interest from federal and state agencies and nonprofit organizations. So this could be an opportunity, at least in New Hampshire, to connect up with the Student Conservation Association. I'm planning on attending one of those meetings and just seeing if there looks like some potential there, but that might be of interest. And that would also connect up with the Stewardship Network, which is a new initiative that has started in Michigan, but is coming to New England to work on stewardship, to help link volunteers to stewardship projects. And so if we can get coordinated enough with knowing what invasive projects are need work, maybe we can link up both volunteers and possibly the Student Conservation Association. So these are just some ideas that are out there that may possibly fall into place if we get the right people thinking about them and working toward that. I think that some of the things that Lindy brought up that were kind of reality checks on, and I think, Karen, you alluded to this as well, that it's a lot of work to manage a crew of people to do stuff. And as Lindy mentioned, to have everything in place, all the permissions, the access, to know when things need to be done, and to have everything scheduled and have teams trained and ready to roll. And it's a huge thing, not just a little thing. And I know that when there were just some discussions about the stewardship network, just trying to place individual volunteers with organizations, those very same questions came up. Well, we want to have work done with the use of volunteers, but it's really hard to find the time to manage them and plan out just what they'll be doing and to give those volunteers the feedback that they need and the connections that they are desiring with the federal agency or state agency people or nonprofit staff that will give them a better sense of what work life is like. So all of these things kind of come into play in the real reality of doing something like this.
Yeah, that's Charlie. All good points. The thing I find myself contemplating a little just while we've got everybody on the phone is when we went after this grant, we were obviously focusing on the Connecticut River watershed and thinking about it from that footprint. As somebody who goes after grants sometimes, I could see another model here where I come from, I study public policy and public administration, and I call myself an institutional analyst, so it's about governance structures of commons is what I've done a lot of work on, and what we're talking about is certainly a commons that requires lots of different organizations to try to handle the problem of invasives. But I could almost see if this idea of connection to universities has some traction, I could see a proposal where it's not just the Connecticut River, but maybe it's Steve's area and Susan's area and possibly Lindy's area if she's interested, where we're looking at the institutional designs of how you would actually implement this thing in the organizational and university networks that are in the areas of interest. So I'm just throwing that out there in case there's interest. I could see two scales of, two different proposals. One that's trying to look at how do you do this pilots in 4 different regions of the country as opposed to just one area. But for what it's worth, I don't know if that was worth, hopefully it was, but.
Yeah, well, we all have something to learn from each other, so
yeah.
So that could play well into bringing the strengths from the various areas and putting them together into a model that has been tried out and worked in different situations.
This is Susan. I'd be really, really interested in hearing more as you progress with your idea. I definitely think that we in New Jersey could learn from the experience of other people, and we'd be happy to continue to share ours and even, like you just said, piloting an idea in a few different areas might entice funders because the scope would be greater,
right.
And the transferability to more regions of the country would probably be, something they'd view favorably. So I'd really like to, hear as you continue your discussion, even though geographically we're not connected. Just always curious about what people are doing and what's working and what people try that doesn't work, so that maybe I don't have to try that.
So Susan,
terrific. Thank you.
You were saying, Susan, that the first year when you did have the grant funding, you used college students as strike team members. How did that work out, and were you able to pay them? What was the situation there?
Well, it worked out great. I would say we probably had 40 applicants for just a very few positions, like 4 positions our first year. I mean, so the interest is there among students. And I think we paid, $15 an hour. And with grant funding, that was fine. In hindsight, we probably made a mistake in providing, free labor to anybody who wanted it, and it was a first-come, first-served basis. And then, obviously, the second year, we learned about needing to prioritize and sending people not just, places where folks asked, but where we had really established that there was a significant problem. And moving forward, what we've decided to do with the limited funding that we have is instead of hiring people ourselves and then having to have a vehicle and then paying insurance for the vehicle and driving all across the state, we're actually allocating our limited stewardship money, and we'll have a program where organizations that have employees can apply to us to defer some of their invasive species control costs. And we're going to launch that next year and see how that works for us as opposed to hiring our own people. And hopefully these organizations will be utilizing the services of college students, recent college grads, that kind of thing.
Interesting.
So
Thank
we're
you.
still learning.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everyone for their ear.
Thanks, Charlie. And thanks to everyone for giving input on that. Any other questions that came to anyone's mind as you were hearing anybody talk today and wanting to get more information or more clarification on anything?
Just, Charlie, this is Karen. If you ever want to have just a brainstorming meeting around this or some way of doing it, I'm happy to participate.
That would be great, Karen.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, that brings up the issue that there might be people on the call that aren't really connected yet with the Connecticut River Watershed Group that might want to look at this in a different scale or a different scenario and discuss any of these strike team issues. And if that's the case, on the screen right now, you'll see Tessa Dowling's email address. Go ahead and jot that down and send Tessa a quick email and tell about your interest in following up with any of these discussions, and we'll try to schedule something for maybe January sometime. Does that sound okay, Charlie?
That sounds great.
Okay.
Hey, Cynthia, this is Mike Bald.
Mike, were you able to get on and see the presentation?
No, but I tuned in, and I want to say thanks to all the presenters, the speakers. It was good stuff. I did have one question, if I can send it out.
Sure.
Okay. Was curious to know, I guess from recent experience, and then moving forward with some of Charlie's thoughts and concepts. Has anyone looked to other than grant funding, like the private sector and individuals and businesses, corporate sponsors, for example? Personally, I have not, as a private business, I've not had a whole lot of success with internships through, or people coming out through the state or through school programs. But I do get people out with me all the time just to, quote unquote, spend the day, and they come back over and over, and they just seem thrilled. But you have to fund that or support that somehow. So I'm just kind of wondering. I don't like to work through grants, and I'm just wondering if anybody's found other ways to fund certain site treatment programs or ideas. Thanks.
It's an important question.
This is Susan. With our strike team, we've realized that a 1 or 2 year grant is not going to keep us going, and so we have started reaching out to the business community for sponsorship. We're also doing some work as an intermediary between landowners and contractors, so that we're getting a little bit of fee for service work by connecting vendors with people who need work on their land. So we're trying to get creative and just experimenting a little bit. It's really new to us, this whole process of doing that, but diversifying the revenue stream is really important.
That's an interesting concept to be kind of that intermediary of the connector that actually can get a little bit of income coming off of that. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, we'll see. And we're also going to try to get an audience with state leaders to get a portion of, the several $1 million a year that goes into our environmental protection unit to say, here's some coordination work we're doing that the state doesn't have to. So even if they just fund us $10,000 or $20,000 a year, that would be really wonderful. I have no idea what kind of response they're going to get, but clearly we have to explore more than just grants. Definitely.
Yeah, and Mike's idea of trying to connect up to private funders, those Bill Gates, Robert Redfords of the world that are looking for good things to place their money into. If we could find some way to connect up with the right people who might have a sensibility to this issue, that would be so wonderful.
Thanks, Cynthia. Thanks, Susan. Thanks to everyone.
Any other final questions? Well, I want to thank all the speakers, Lindy, Steve, Susan, Charlie, and everybody for tuning into this and providing good questions and food for thought. And we are recording this, so if you know of others that were interested in being involved but weren't able to make it today, know that we'll be getting that information out on how to get to this recording. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for organizing, Cynthia.
Sure. Thanks to the Forest Service, too.
Yep. Thank you, Florence.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Florence, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Have you stopped the recording? Have you stopped the recording?
I just stopped it, yes.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for doing that.